So continuing our discussion on auto rotations, I think this is part 7. We're going to be looking at several different models of helicopters, and we're going to look at their performance in an auto rotation, both down here in good old thick air, and then we're going to contrast their performance at high altitude, and we'll pick 10,000 feet, and we're going to look at several different helicopters there. So there's 4 speeds that you need to be aware of if you're going to be doing auto rotations in a helicopter. The first of which is the minimum descent speed. And you guys remember the minimum descent speed is the speed that you fly at. It gives you the minimum amount of descent. It's at the bottom of that curve that looks at the descent rate versus airspeed in auto rotation. It's the bottom of the curve. And then there's the recommended speed for performing an auto rotation, and then those are always going to be a bit higher recommendation for the recommended airspeed. And again, the reason being is because we have more kinetic energy at that little bit higher speed. Take the R-44 and as an example, the minimum descent speed is 55 knots, but we actually fly the auto rotation at 70. And the reason being is at 70, we got way more kinetic energy. And the trade-off for that is that your sink rate is going to increase, but it really doesn't increase that much more. At 55 knots, we're going to have a sink rate of about 1,500 foot per minute, and at 70 knots, our sink rate is going to increase to about 1,700 foot per minute, just a couple hundred feet more per minute. That's a very small thing to have to deal with compared to the amount of increase in kinetic energy that we get. So you'll notice that the recommended speed for performing the auto rotation is somewhat higher than the minimum descent speed. Third speed you want to look at is going to be the maximum range speed, or the maximum range within an auto rotation speed. All right, and we'll look at each of those here separately. And then last, and certainly not least, is going to be the V&E in an auto rotation. All right, and we're going to contrast and compare all of these different models. We're going to start off with the R-44 and the R-66. We'll go a little bit out of order. We'll look at those two first, and then we'll come back and look at the R-22. And then we'll contrast we'll compare that to the turbine helicopters. The R-66, the 206, 407, and the Huey. So, starting off with the R-44. Okay, so the R-44. Now, here's your V&E chart on R-44. And it doesn't matter whether it's an R-44 Raven 1 or an R-44 Raven 2. The V&E chart is exactly the same on one model versus the other. Right? If you look down here on the bottom of the V&E chart, there's a little statement here that says for auto rotations, subtract 30 knots. All right? So if we were to look, here in good old thick air, our V&E is 130 knots. And if we were to subtract 30 knots from that, we get that's 100 knots. So our maximum, our V&E and auto rotation is 100 knots. Right? What are the other speeds on the R-44? The minimum descent speed is 55. The recommended auto rotation speed is 70. And then the maximum range speed is actually 90. And not only do you let your speed come up to 90, but you lift on the collective a little bit to bring your RPMs down to 90%. And do what's called a 90-90 glide. And if you do a 90-90 glide, the aircraft will go a bit farther than if you did a standard rotation at 100% and 70 knots. So, all right. And again, down here in thick air, our V&E is 100 knots. All right. So now let's look at what happens when we go up in altitude. And we're going to go up again to a standard day, Leadville, Colorado. We'll just say it's 10,000 feet on a standard day. And what's going to happen to our speeds here? All right, so, and we're looking specifically at our V&E in auto rotation. How's that going to change as we go up to 10,000 feet? Well, if we look on our chart here, we start at 10,000 feet here, and we bring it over to -5 degrees as a standard day at 10,000 feet. Then our auto rotation speed is going to be limited, our V&E rather, in auto rotation, our V&E rather, is going to be about 104 or so. And so we'd have to subtract 30 from that. That's 74. Not too bad. We could do it auto rotation easily at 65 to 70 knots, and not really flirt with the V&E, the calculated V&E of 74 knots at 10,000 feet on a standard day. So not too bad. Getting closer, but not too bad. All right. If we look at the R-66, this is the first of our turbine helicopters that we're going to look at. Again, the minimum descent speed on an R-66 is 60 knots. The recommended auto rotation speed is 60 to 70 knots. I tend to like 70 better. So, And our max glide, our max range speed, again, is a 90-90 glide. 90 knots forward airspeed, raise the collective a little bit to drive the RPMs down to 90, and again, you'll go farther than you would at a 70 knot auto rotation with 100% rotor speed. And again, if you look at the V&E, our auto-rotated V&E down here in good old thick air, once again, is 100 knots. All right, so we're limited to 100 knots on auto rotation. All right. So, here, and that's here. Here's our 100 knots of auto rotation down in good old thick air. But let's see what happens when we go up to high altitude. And again, the R66 is nice because they have a V&E chart up here for powered on V&E. And down here they have an auto rotation chart for auto rotation V&E. And if you look at 10,000 and slide over to -5, it's going to be halfway in between 93 and 98 knots, or somewhere in the neighborhood of about 95 knots. Again, 95 knots is our auto rotated V&E. We're going to be doing our auto rotation at 70 typically. I don't think that I would contemplate doing a 90-90 glide at 10,000 feet, because you got to remember the rule of thumb for getting a blade stall is 80% RPM plus 1% per 1,000 feet. So at least in theory, at 10,000 feet, we could get a blade stall at 90% blade RPM, and that's not good, all right? So at 10,000 feet, but we can reasonably certainly do a normal 70 knot auto rotation, 70 knot indicated airspeed at 10,000 feet in an R66, and we got a pretty good margin between the auto rotation V&E and the speed that we'd actually do the auto rotation at. Again, not bad. Okay, so when you go to the R22, if you look up in the POH, if you're looking for the auto rotation V&E listing for an R22, you're going to be looking a long time, because it's not in there. There's no recommendations for how you adjust your auto rotation V&E at altitude. All right? If you look at the R44, which basically they tell you to shave off 30 knots off your 130 here, that's about a 20% reduction, So if you were to extrapolate that out to an R22 and look at your V&E chart, well, let's look at what the V&E would be on a standard day, -5 degrees Celsius, 10,000 feet at Leadville, Colorado, would be down here for the Beta 2. And here's our 10,000 feet. So 10,000 feet and -5 would be a V&E, a V&E, power on V&E of about 76, all right? About 76 knots, right? If we reduce that by 20%, now we're down to about 60, 61 knots or so. And that's just our extrapolated auto rotation V&E. So again, you're starting to get pretty close on performance. So it would be, could you auto rotate a Beta 2 at 10,000 feet? You could, but your speed, your V&E in auto rotation and the speed that you would like to do the auto rotation at are getting pretty darn close. So your margin for safety there is actually quite small. So, okay. All right, we'll continue on with the other models in the next video.